It's a great pleasure to welcome Mandy Haggith to the pod. Author, poet, activist, crofter in Assynt, author of novels for children and adults, poetry collections, and recently the wonderful Lost Elms, which we will come to in a little while, I think. But Mandy, I wonder if you would like to just start by telling us a bit about yourself, your home, your croft in Assynt, where you are at the moment.
Yeah, so I am the luckiest person in the world. I get to live in Achmelvich all year round. People come here from far and wide to come and see our very photogenic beach and very beautiful place. But yeah, I get to be here all year round, which is lovely. And I live on a 11-hectare croft with my husband Bill. It's his croft. He's the official crofter. And yes, it's we call it Wonderland because it is. It's not necessarily. It's not. It has interesting weather. It has lots of weather. I like that. It has what is described, I think, really beautifully as a great light climate, which is a term that I've only just recently come across. But in the winter, for example, we get extraordinary light with low angle light, very, very long nights. If they're dark, we have absolutely dark skies. So, chances of the northern lights and so forth, and lots of starlight in the winter, which is really fantastic. And then in the middle of the summer, the sun basically hardly sets at all up here. So we get long, 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 long days and wonderful dusky light that fades into dawn light and things. So yes, it's a fantastic light climate. And
That's a lovely term. I hadn't heard
mm,
that actually. I get that
uh,
actually.
yeah,
The light climate, having been and worked in kind of northern climes, quite Arctic, close and Arctic climes. Yeah, that kind of feels right.
yeah,
Exactly. Well, that's a
no,
nice setting
absolutely.
for the remarkable changes that have been happening in land ownership and community development in Scotland. So, two laws encouraging local buyouts of estates and islands. But actually, the Assynt Development Trust began well before those came into play. So, Assynt was one of the forerunners. So, I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about kind of what community development looks like in Ascent and some of the ups and downs, because it's not always, life's not always up, is it? Once, but there are continuing performance challenges when it comes to community development. But it's something that you're at the centre of, and we'll explore a couple of methods that you've been using for that as well in a moment or two.
No, sure. So my husband Bill, he was one of the founding members of the Ascent Crofters Trust, which was the organization that kind of made history back in the early 90s by um, taking when the land was sold by the sporting landowner who'd owned it, the crofters ganged up together and mounted a bid to buy the land for themselves and formed a company, the Ascent Crofters Trust, and bought it. I think much to everybody's surprise, and that in many ways by making the impossible possible, kind of kick-started the land reform movement in Scotland, and then legislation kind of started to follow and make it a legal right for communities to have the right to buy and the right in the case when land came up on the market for sale, the sale to be stopped while the community tried to raise the money to be able to buy it themselves. And we were actually, so that was in the early 90s. In the late 90s, we bought a chunk of woodland, and then in 2005, when the law kind of caught up with what was going on the ground here, we were the first community to use the Land Reform Act in earnest and actually stop a sale in the open market and raise 3 million quid to enable us to buy the four mountains of Sylvan and Canisp and Coolmore and Colbeg, and also the big house at Glen Canisp. So we became the proud owners at that stage of a total of about 68,000 acres in the parish, which is, and each of those pieces are run by a different community organisation. And so we are very rich in community organisations here, many of whom have got a lot of assets and resources in capital terms anyway. Of course, we're duty bound not to flog them on the open market. That's the kind of the whole point. So being asset rich doesn't make us wealthy in the sense of having enough money to pay the bills and all that sort of stuff. And that is the ongoing struggle. You can have a lot of assets, but actually having the revenue that enables you to cover all your running costs can be a real challenge. And Assynt Foundation, certainly, who bought the mountains, ran into that difficulty. And yeah, I think it's common to a lot of community organisations that they face that ongoing challenge that you can't get anybody to subsidise your running costs. We don't have any renewable energy schemes which are providing any kind of community benefit, apart from one small hydro run by the crofters. But yeah, most communities in this part of the world have got some kind of renewable energy kind of benefit coming in. We're yet to achieve that. But we own we built the leisure centre, and we also took over the old people's facility, and we took over the transport facility, and so there's a lot of community owned stuff going on here. The Assynt Development Trust was actually an organisation set up to, in many ways, act as a coordinating body for all of these other different community bodies that have assets, and it is also, it owns the what used to be the Fisherman's Mission that we bought, and now have that run as a cafe and so forth, and the football pitch, and now a new patch of land that we're trying to build houses on as well. So yeah, there's a continuing and continuous stream of community activity going on here, trying to make life livable, because we're quite short of the sort of state-run resources that people in urban areas take for granted, I think.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's an amazing picture. I mean, I think people don't realize quite exactly what's going on there, partly because of the sort of Westminster stroke London centric view of the UK as a whole. But you're a long way from Edinburgh as well, let alone kind of Southern England. And that kind of knowledge as to what community development trusts and crofting trusts and others have been able to do, that level of kind of ambition and interest, and the continuing problems of finding a revenue stream. You've got to bring money into places somehow, haven't
Mm-hmm.
we, in order to keep the stuff going. I mean, just maintenance costs, let alone coming up with new ideas. But it
Mm-hmm.
does sound kind of amazing, really,
Yeah.
all you've achieved. Um,
The most recent development, and which I think is really exciting, is that Ascent isn't working alone, perhaps as much as it has in the past, because there's now a thing called the Northwest 2045, which was set up to kind of come up with a vision for how we were going to respond to the legal requirement for us to reach net zero carbon emissions by 2045, and 7 community council areas, of which Assynt is one, so Coyrach to the south, and then us, and then Scary and Kinlochbervie and Durness, which takes us up to the top left corner, the northwest corner, Cape Wrath, and then the two community council areas, Tungscarra and Malness, and then Betty Hill and Strathnaver and Nahara. Those two community council areas as well we've all ganged up together as one area of very sparsely populated but very large patches of land, who all have very similar problems. And so, for example, we found that of those 7 areas, only 2 of them had any functioning childcare facilities at all. And so, which is obviously a massive problem if people want to kind of come and live and work here and things, if there's no childcare. And that comes down to sort of local authorities not being able to kind of join the dots of getting the right people with the right certificates in the right places and all that sort of stuff together. But by working collectively as people on the ground, we've been able to get, now all 7 of those areas have got childcare facilities again that we're running at our own hand effectively. And that kind of activity happens over and over again. And it's quite fun that we've now reached a point where we are ganging up together with our neighbouring communities and forming a kind of like bigger community with a bit more muscle and a bit more kind of clout, to be able to kind of push for the sorts of changes that we need to happen at governmental level and
Fantastic.
with big business and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a model I've seen in other countries of groups organizing within their communities and then federating upwards,
Hmm. Hmm.
to kind of, to, as you say, to get collective strength with that.
Yeah.
And then, quite often people from that then find ways of getting elected to kind of formal government bodies if they want to
Yeah.
do that.
Yeah.
But
No,
as a way to
absolutely.
kind of further influence policy later on. But that federation is the kind of the next step, isn't it? Very, very
Yeah,
interesting.
that's right. But yeah,
Marvelous.
because I mean,
Yeah.
it's a very big area. It's about 300 square kilometers between the seven parishes, and we're a population of just over 3,000 people in total around here. So it's pretty much the lowest population density of anywhere in Europe.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes. Yeah.
yeah.
Amazing. Amazing. Well, look, tell us a little bit about some of your projects. So, community development has got great possibilities. It is hard. Climate action also hard, as you said. The
Mhm.
2045 target, which gives a kind of direction towards resources and also kind of what we might do in communities. You had a project, peat, diesel, and seaweed, which was a lovely way of kind of linking up different kind of, well, two assets and one kind of, means of transport, but it's an interesting one where you are. Tell us a little bit about what you've been doing with that project.
Yeah, so that was a collaboration with the Northwest 2045, and we wanted to um yeah, it was a project to help design the transition to net zero, and we wanted to engage people who are not necessarily getting involved in the conversations yet, and we focused on three topics that we knew were not the kind of mainstream topics of conversation, like, road. Everybody talks about road transport, everybody talks about household energy consumption, food production, and stuff. But so those three are really, really significant in terms of the carbon emissions in our part of the world and the potential and opportunities that they create for new livelihoods in the area. So the first was peatland, where if it's damaged, then it emits a huge amount of carbon. We have a lot of peatland here, which is not in a very good state, but it can be healed, it can be restored, and for healthy peatland is a net sequesterer of carbon, and therefore is kind of can be a really positive part of that achievement of net zero and getting the balance right. Um, and it's opening up new opportunities for jobs, very, very skilled digger drivers, which is something that lights the eyes up in young, particularly young men, it seems, and teenage boys who you tell them there's potentially really important jobs to be had here, and also ecologists and so forth, and also income possibilities from the carbon credits if restoration is successful. And then the diesel bit, we are specifically looking at alternatives to marine diesel because Lochimber here has the second highest fish landings in the country, and that's because we're the first kind of mainland port for the North Atlantic fishing industry, that mostly French and Spanish big fishing ships are out there for kind of week-long fishing cruises and come in, empty their fish into long lines of articulated refrigerated lorries that drive the catch to France and Spain, and then those ships fill up with diesel in our port and then head back out for another week and repeat endlessly. And so our diesel sales are very big from our small harbour here, and it's obvious that the shipping industry, the fishing industry, all boat use is going to have to shift onto something other than diesel, and they're quite slow in actually getting to grips with the alternatives that potentially offer really big benefits for our harbour development, like electrification and hydrogen and so forth. So we wanted to have a conversation around that. And then the third area is also marine. And what these three topics have in common is they're all kind of hidden. I mean, the peat, you can't, there's no fumes from damaged peat, you know what I mean? But it's underground. The marine diesel emissions are all over the horizon, and seaweed is lurking there just under the surface of the water as a very important carbon sequesterer, and also potentially alternative material if we can cultivate it here to offer alternatives to current kind of fossil fuel based things like plastics and cosmetics and so forth. So we're looking at a community led three communities together leading a seaweed cultivation enterprise here. So that was the third topic, and there's a very famous band here called Pete and Diesel, and there's a based in the West Nile, just over the water, and then there's a very famous line by Norman McCaig where he comes out of the Kulag bar and smells fish brine and seaweed, and I kind of concatenated these two things together to kind of to form, yeah, peat diesel and seaweed as what the project has been, and in a kind of nod to the fact that my methodology is poetry, and so I do events with people, get people chipping in ideas and thoughts and feelings and so forth, and then I do interviews with people and transcribe them and gather words and phrases in various ways and then make poems out of them. And that's a different kind of way of doing research, both from the point of view of the analysis using poetry as a kind of distillation and synthesis kind of tool, but also it results in research findings that are very different from your average kind of like research report that sits dusting on a shelf somewhere. And that's fun. That means that both the people who are likely to kind of get involved in the research activities because they're kind of fun and often outdoors and involve words, gets people involved who might not otherwise get involved. And then the findings, I can get those findings to people who would not ever read a research report, but I can pop up at a community meeting or something and perform a poem or read a poem, and that gets the messages out there that so that it's shared in a way that is perhaps unusual and I think better personally.
Brilliant. I love it. I love it. Yeah, that's a phrase that one can use, which is when people see data coming, they duck. There's a,
Yes.
there's kind of like, yes, data is needed. You need to know how much carbon a good peat will suck up and how much carbon different forms of seaweed, kelp or eelgrass or whatever it is, seagrass. But once you know that, then one has still got to sell the story to people to say, look,
Yeah.
this is the thing, this is what electric ships might look like in the future, and this is how we would generate. I mean, it's easy to imagine, difficult to get there. That there could be the renewable energy generation within your region that would supply the electricity and the electricity sector, replace the diesel, and you still have the fishing, but you've suddenly got a huge resource coming in from the purchase of electricity. Of course, there's the boats need to be
Mm,
changed and all of that, but it's going to happen. It's going to happen in the next period of time.
absolutely.
It's just a question of how quickly we can make that happen. Um,
Yeah.
Lovely. You said this lovely thing when we talked previously about verse can't make it worse, which is a kind of great way of just saying, look, words and story matter, poetry matters. Tell us a bit about your pooling the results piece, and perhaps you
Yeah.
might like to
Yeah.
kind of read from it a bit as well, because I think it's a kind of gorgeous way of getting feedback from the community and telling them what the outcomes are, but putting it in a popular cultural framework that actually gets across feelings, because feelings are really difficult to get across in all
Yeah.
this. Certainly, they're impossible in data largely, but in story, you can get feelings across. Um,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's absolutely imperative. I mean, my my own academic background I did artificial intelligence back in the 90s, late 80s, 90s, back when that was a really newfangled thing. And so I kind of came out of a science background, and I left AI. I mean, I put it behind me, as it were, on the basis that I didn't like what direction of travel it was going in, and I kind of feel that I'm a bit vindicated by the way things have turned out. But I was very I used to get, yeah, I worked a lot on forestry and forest research, and again got very much convinced that the sort of technological approaches that we take to research are not going to solve the problems that need to be solved, and that one of the key reasons is that we do all leave our feelings at the door, and we expect research participants to leave their feelings at the door, and yet how we respond to the kind of multiple problems that we're facing, whether that's biodiversity or climate change or whatever, are all driven actually by how we feel about things. And so we are completely kind of endlessly, repeatedly missing the point if we don't acknowledge that people are sitting with often very, very difficult feelings around these topics and around the future. And so in the peat diesel and seaweed project, I didn't want to overpromise that we were going to somehow be able to create impacts that were going to make the world a much better place. And so I think the line you go, well, but at least first can't make it worse, comes from, like, wanting to be modest about and realistic about what expectations people should have about what the impact is going to be. But also, yeah, I mean, it is a little sort of reminder that actually, poetry is is something that can get to places that other research methods don't get. So the first thing that we did in the project was we ran what looked like a fairly conventional survey online, and we two of those questions which came from Northwest 2045 were, what's your worst fear about climate change and what climate action gives you hope? And the I did the analysis of the results of the survey and the answers to those two questions. I set them out in a way reminiscent of the way that the football pools used to get read out on the Saturday afternoon. So people of a certain generation kind of would recognize it. So I'll just read the result. Pooling the results. Polar bear fears 3, hope none. Fear of extinction of species 4, hope none. Storms and floods and sea level rises 5. Planting trees 3. Burning to death or ice age 2. Simple life 1. Food insecurity 2. Gardening 4. Mass migration 1. Technological progress 3. Conflict and war 2. Positive news 2. Inertia of government 2. Greta Thunberg 5. Suffering of vulnerable people 2. Hope none. Climate denial 1. Hope none.
Fabulous. Brilliant. Love it. Very nice.
Yeah,
I like this. I like the way that you use kind of cultural symbols that we understand and the kind of phraseology in the language, the setup there of the football results, and the feedback there is brilliant. But also the sense of a little bit of hint of good, but also quite a lot of just how hard it is, and how difficult things are. Finding hope is a really difficult thing, isn't it?
mm-hmm.
And
But
using that
yeah.
to drive kind of agency, really, people's capacity to want to do stuff. So
Mhm.
yeah, lovely.
I mean,
Um,
that's just the results of the survey. So,
oh, sure.
like, it was not I was not creating in the sense that, I mean, these were genuinely the phrases that people used in their responses to the survey. And the reason, and I wrote the poem because I was stunned that the answer from 4 people about what is what climate action gives you hope, the answer was none from 4 different individuals unprompted. And that just kind of struck me that, oh, and then I did an event with some young people and asked them how they were feeling about the future and climate change, and the it was quite clear that they were despairing and there was no hope there at all, and it was really worrying, and it became a sort of urgent thing at that point with the project partners that we sat down and said, look at these results, we need to actually kind of make sure that what we try to do with the remainder of the project to see if we can actually generate some hope here, because this is really, really worrying and really dire. And so and I think having the poem in that form, having the results in that form, that it's very easy to be able to show people this is what people are saying here. And we can't just stand by and just do nothing in that case.
Lovely.
So, yeah.
Thank you. A quick couple of words, well, more than a couple of words about your lovely book, The Lost Elms. Lovely story of the great elms. The 25 million, I think you say, die in the UK as a result of the Dutch elm disease, as it's called, striking in the 70s onwards. And you begin in a beautiful way with this story about growing up in an elm wood, the magnificent tall trees, and then they start dying, and the ghosts taking over, and the landslide that stops you getting to school, and then picking up on the beautiful elms. Tell us a little bit about that. But then also they seem to be above the temperature isocline in Scotland, so that the beetles didn't come that far north. You still got the midges, but not the
Hmm.
beetles. But then lately, climate change has brought the beetles as well. So there's a kind of twist as well, isn't there? Um, it's a gorgeous book. It's brilliant. I really liked it.
Oh,
Um,
thank you very much. Thank you.
uh,
It's been delight actually that I thought it was a bit niche. I was asked to write this book after the oldest tree in Europe died. Oldest elm tree in Europe died, which was the Bewley elm, which was 800 more than 800 years old. And we know because it was planted by the monks who built the priory at Bewley back in the 1200s, and the trees the priory has long been a ruin and the trees remain standing. The last one of them succumbed to Dutch elm disease in 2022. And I was asked to write this book, and I thought it would be a very niche thing to write a book about elms, but I was up for it because of the fact that I had that childhood experience of growing up in a woodland and watching them all die when I was a kid. And then when I moved to Edinburgh in my early 20s, the disease had arrived in Edinburgh, and I watched them all die there as well. So I kind of feel like I've had this sort of lifelong relationship with elms, and they are culturally hugely important as a tree of death, and of mourning, and of offering comfort after death, and to grievers, and that's sort of pan Europe and, well, globally really. Wherever elms are, they seem to have this resonance about them. And my own experience in writing the book was that I went through a very, very dark time. My father died. I'd had a very difficult relationship with him, and at the point where he died, it was like a whole lot of stuff just kind of got me in one fell swoop, and I was unable to do most things, and yet somehow I was able to do anything if it was elm tree related. And the elms gradually gradually healed me. Even on the worst days, it was possible to go out and be with an elm tree or find out something else extraordinary about elm trees, because they are fascinating trees. And although they do have that connotation with death, they also have all sorts of other cultural connotations. And there's lots of folklore that links them to other more positive things as well. And the Scandinavians believe the very first woman was made from an elm tree, for example, while the first man was made from an ash. And anyway, so it was the writing of the book about elms felt like it was a kind of personal healing. So there's a kind of strand of memoir that goes through the book, but also I couldn't just, like you say, I mean there's a climate change connection in that the beetles need really warm summer weather to fly, and we've always been kind of too far northwest of the kind of warm conditions that they like, but that's changing with climate change, and that's why there's this sort of inexorable creep of the disease north. And we still, touch wood, are in the last mainland kind of refuge for Dutch elm disease, for elms not getting Dutch elm disease. And but I couldn't sort of write this book and take the time that required and stand by and do nothing while waiting for the disease to come and take these beautiful trees that we still have. And so I set up a community project with all sorts of interested people, including the primary school children, who took elms hugely to their heart and adopted the elm tree nearest to the school and called it Elmo and have been looking after it, but also got really involved in kind of planting the next generation of elms and making sure we've got a kind of really wide genetic diversity of elms in the area, and trying to make sure that our elm population is as resilient as it can possibly be at the point when because it probably is when rather than if, we do finally get the pesky beetles in the area. And we've had one scare, and it turned out actually to be okay. And we were declared last year again Dutch elm disease free. So like we'll just hope that carries on. But the lovely thing about that was the discovery of how planting trees at times when it's quite difficult, I think, to find positive things to do with respect to like the natural world, planting a tree and thinking about the kind of long-term future of, because when you plant a tree, it's an act of faith in the next several hundred years, and also thinking at a landscape level rather than just sort of at an individual level. That was a really big part of what the project generated.
Both of those kind of open up perspectives, don't they? Time into the
Yeah,
future, breadth in thinking at the moment, and perhaps that
yeah,
has an echo back into people being able to think more than just about themselves, but thinking more community, ultimately
yeah.
the world as a whole. If
Yeah,
we're going to solve these things. Um, yeah, fantastic.
yeah,
We've got a couple of mature elms in just on the edge of the village where I live,
nice.
that have survived. So the genetic material
Yeah,
is there. But also there's a village about 6 or 7 miles away from here called Elmset, and it has a row of 8 mature elms on the
brilliant.
road that are still there. Oh, of
Yeah,
course they would be at Elmset. I mean, it's kind of like,
yeah,
brilliant. So we know that the resistant genetic material is there
yeah,
in adults.
yeah,
So I hope that these efforts are successful in the future. Um,
yeah,
let's come to a quick fire kind of few finishing things then,
yeah.
Mandy. A heroine or hero for you?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, I don't like the idea of heroes and heroines. I kind of think that I taught a module called heroic literature at the university for several years, and I think that there's both the problem with heroes and heroines. It's a part of a kind of Western mindset that is very individualistic, actually, that is kind of part of the problem. And so the really interesting solutions to everything are ones that involve lots of people working together and being collaborative and not relying on a single hero or heroine. And also the whole idea of heroism is it demands too much of us as individuals as well, and leads us to feel that you've got to be heroic in order to make a difference in the world. And we know, the butterfly effect is a real thing, that little changes can snowball into vast changes, and that we don't all need to actually adopt hero heroine roles in order to really make a significant difference. So, yeah, so
Asks
that's
too much of us, doesn't it, at
yeah,
times? Yes, yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
Lovely answer. Great. Your book or cultural item to recommend? What would you recommend? Um,
yeah. This is a really difficult thing to answer, but what I go back to, and there are two books I go back to. One is Hermann Hesse's Siddhartha. I'm not a Buddhist, but it's just an amazing text and story of a man who kind of finds peace by relinquishing that ego and just getting into a big river, which is fantastic. But then I think also Barbara Kingsolver I go back to repeatedly, and she's an amazing author, amazing writer, and particularly somebody I admire for her ability to produce stories that are told from multiple perspectives simultaneously. And so, and my favorite of those is Prodigal Summer, which is um, a story about how we relate to the modern human world, but also how we relate to each other across the generations. And it's got a character in it called Nanny Rawlings, who I absolutely aspire to become, a little old lady who keeps bees and plants apple trees and really does a power of good in the world at the same time. And like, yeah,
there you
yeah.
go. That's a great aspiration. Lovely. Yes, yeah, I agree. Yeah, great. And one top action. What should or could people do? Um, in their communities when it comes to these sort of nature, climate, community, social equality kind of challenges that we're all facing. What?
Yeah, I think there's obviously go and plant a tree. It's a way of generating hope, but I think only some people can do that. Some people have got that resource. But what we've all got the resource to do is, I think I'm doing, yeah, is to imagine what I call imaginative time travel. And I think and it's something that people can do immediately and do repeatedly. And I think it's a really important kind of imaginative gymnastics that we all need to get better at doing, which is to go into the past and find things from the past that are good, things that were beautiful or uplifting, or so it might be a personal memory of your own of some time when you were happy, or it might be something to do with an ancestor or a time past that you wished you lived in, but to kind of imaginatively go there really richly, to use all five senses to really kind of immerse yourself imaginatively in that past moment. And then, however far back in time you went to find that good thing, so it might be that you went 20 years into the past, it might be that you went 120 years into the past, then go imaginatively that far into the future and take that good thing with you. In some way or another, try to imagine the future world with that good thing in it. And again, use all five of your senses to really richly imagine a future world that has got that good thing glowing still there within it, and then come back now. And I do this exercise with lots of people in my research, and my experience is that people feel better as a result of doing it, and feel, and I hope that what it's doing is that well, I see it, and I ask, it seems to generate hope about the future, and so that's my aspiration, that we, by doing that kind of, yeah, much more positive imagination of the future, we'll actually be in a position to generate a much more positive future.
Lovely. It's a kind of burning sun, really, isn't it? Right at your heart that you're creating
Yeah,
for the future in that way.
yeah.
Mandy Haggith, thank you so much indeed for coming on the pod. It's been gorgeous to hear about. The verse doesn't make it worse; it makes it a whole lot better. It really does. And indeed, that's something everybody can do, isn't it? I mean,
Yes.
we've all got words of some sort. There's no special qualification needed. There's just a way of interacting with the world to come up with something that tells a bit of a story, and that imagining going back and forward is a gorgeous technique. So thank you so much. That's great.
Great.
Thank you, Andy.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.